So guys, in this video and the next, I'll be going over the new PR9 stuff, starting with Max Immelman as well as the new UR Dive Bomber. I'm a little bit busy job hunting right now, so I can't bang out the entire update in one video like I usually do, so that's why the rest of the stuff will be covered in tomorrow's video. If you're a high-level exec in a tech company, please give me a shot. I can cook, and my island is a level 58. Alright, getting back on topic, let's take a look at Max Immelman. This is probably the most PR ship of all time, as in her kit is literally just a bunch of self-buffs plus barrages, with no team support or restrictions whatsoever. I'm not really sure why at this point, but I have the impression from back in the day that PR ships are just supposed to be really strong stat sticks, and that's exactly what she is. Looking at her barrages here in the barrages tab, not only is the total damage extremely high, but everything is aimed and will be guaranteed to land if you use her with the proper setup. Her barrage modifiers skew toward medium armor, even though the planes that the barrage summons should skew toward heavy. I think maybe the devs made a typo, but I do believe that the data miners are reporting it accurately. Putting it all together, since there isn't really anything in terms of RNG buffs, synergy, or unknown hit rates from her barrages, I just ran some quick calcs and here are the results. Assuming I inputted all the numbers correctly, the damage numbers should be accurate since carriers are the most predictable in that regard, but take it with a grain of salt because I definitely could have typoed a number here or there. Against light armor, she's got about 40% more damage than Fritz Rume, assuming a loadout of 2 HFARs and the fast Eagle Union Dive Bomber that came out during Lexington 2's event. This loadout would allow her to easily get off 4 airstrikes in an 80-second fight, just like Fritz Rume, but she could also opt to go for the 81 Skyraider in her second slot instead, increasing her damage per airstrike. Against medium and heavy is where it gets even more nutty, as it seems like her damage is well over 50% higher than Fritz Rume's damage against medium, and also 50% over Amagi against heavy. As a result of her over 500 base aviation, 9 planes all at 160% efficiency, and every type of self-buff multiplied on top of each other, and also one of, if not the strongest aimed barrage, she is bringing a completely different level of power creep over the existing carriers, to a much greater extent than the likes of GVB over existing battleships. With this amount of damage in her kit on pretty much no condition, she is the best carrier in the game right now for all bossing scenarios, despite her complete lack of team synergies. She also has some effects that reduce her detection gauge, which is hard to measure, but I do notice that, for example, Shinano gets revealed very easily because she doesn't have any detection gauge reduction mechanic. A lot of newer carriers have some sort of detection gauge reduction baked into their skills though, so it's just something nice to have rather than something that makes her stand out in that regard. Okay, that's honestly all there is to say about her since there's nothing really being hidden in her skills. Now I want to cover the new UR plane as well, which is a dive bomber of the skip bomber type. And in Azur lane, this just means that this plane acts closer to an aimed torpedo bomber than an actual dive bomber. First, comparing it to the other dive bombers, it is a whopping 30% upgrade over the Tenrai when hit rates are accounted for, a complete no-brainer for any dive bomber slot against a single target. Next, putting it beside torpedo bombers, it's actually stronger than a lot of older torpedo bombers like the Ryusei and the Ju-87. It is just slightly weaker than the VIT-2 and the new FW-190 after adjusting for its lower aviation scaling of 0.8, but not by much, and it's actually stronger when accounting for the extra 20 aviation you gain from it being a rainbow plane, which not only affects other plane slots but barrages as well. The only torpedo bomber that is for sure stronger than it is the event-limited Ryusei Kai. This means that if you do have the luxury to do so, you probably should be using this dive bomber over torpedo bombers for its higher aviation when you're fighting a heavy armor boss. I went and ran some calcs with Hakuryu with a new skip bomber in her second slot, since she has been kind of held back by dive bombers being relatively weak compared to other planes, and her personal damage does seem to catch up to Amagi as a solo carrier. So in a world where Mecklenburg, Max Immelman, and Nakhimov are running around, it could be better to use Hakuryu as a solo carrier over Amagi, given that her debuff is more universal compared to Amagi's torpedo buff, which only affects the torpedoes of allied IJN ships. It seems like the Rainbow research gear has been alternating between something you'd want at least 5 copies of and something you'd probably never need more than 3 of. This new plane being something that you probably want 5 or more copies of, after the Mecklenburg from last season, which you only really need 3 of. Anyway, we can finally stop thinking of new ships with dive bomber slots as dead on arrival, at least in a few months when people start getting a few copies of this new plane. They have finally saved the dive bomber slot by turning them into torpedo bombers. Alright, that's it for part 1. I'll see you guys tomorrow for part 2, where I'll go over the rest of the ships and the equipment.